Hello and welcome to MEELive. Join us as together we take another look at the stories that are shaping our world.
We are broadcasting live to YouTube from Middle East Eye's headquarters here in London.
I'm Mohammed Hassan.
And I'm Matilda Mallinson. Today is Tuesday the 13th of May. Mohammed, what have we got coming up on today's show?
Well, as we're speaking right now, the US President Donald Trump is in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia speaking at the US-Saudi Investment Forum. They have just signed billions of dollars worth of deals, including arms deals. He's set to spend the next 3 days there. There's a lot on his agenda and a lot of big questions that need answering, a lot of things that every single country wants and expects from him. He obviously has a lot of business deals that he wants to get on the table. So what exactly is happening? What has happened today? What will happen over the next couple of days? That's what we're looking into in our deep dive.
And am I right, though, in thinking that Israel is not one of the countries he's visiting, despite a request from Netanyahu?
Yes, controversially. Now, you may have heard that there was a high-profile U.S.-Israeli hostage that was released from Gaza this week. That entire deal took place without Israel involved. And so it seems like their relationship is on ice at the moment, but how does that filter into the rest of what is happening this week? We have Sean Matthews, our U.S. reporter, who is going to be breaking all of that down for us.
Okay, good, because I have a lot of questions about that whole situation.
Great. Let's get through them one at a time.
Yeah.
And you are taking a look at something very high profile that is happening here in the UK.
Yes, here in the UK, there is a trial that has finally gone to court after a 19-month process, and that is because a legal challenge has been placed against our government about arms exports to Israel.
Now, I believe somebody is in court for us today.
Oh, we have actually a few voices from the courtroom. It appears to have been a very lively atmosphere. So we'll be getting the latest for anyone who stays tuned until our Spotlight segment.
All right, plenty to get through, so let's crack ahead. Let's start with our headlines today, huh? An Israeli-American hostage has reunited with his family following a deal struck between Hamas and the United States, following a series of direct talks that sidelined Israel. Eden Alexander was released to the Red Cross last night after spending more than 584 days in Gaza. The IDF soldier and the first Israeli captive to be released since early March, when a negotiated ceasefire was broken by Israel. The move is seen as a goodwill gesture to U.S. President Donald Trump by Hamas and coincides with Trump's visit to the region this week. It's also seen as a slight to the Israeli government, and in particular Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who last week announced a permanent military occupation of Gaza, the displacement of more than 2 million Palestinians, and indicated he would not return to hostage negotiations. Israeli media reports describe tensions between the U.S. president and Netanyahu over Iranian nuclear talks, which have led Trump to sideline Israel in a number of key regional negotiations. Alexander was scheduled to fly to Qatar to meet with Trump today, but Israel's government says he will instead undergo health checks before being permitted to travel. And we'll be diving deeper into Trump's visit to the Middle East later in the show, including the high-stakes Iranian nuclear talks and the president's deteriorating relationship with Netanyahu.
The PKK, or Kurdistan Workers' Party, has announced it is disbanding after a 40-year-long conflict with Turkey over Kurdish autonomy and rights. The group's decision follows a call in February from its imprisoned leader, Abdullah Öcalan, who called the armed struggle a product of a bygone era and called on Kurds to seek rights through democratic processes. Turkish President Erdogan has hailed the decision as a milestone for security, peace, and brotherhood, ending years of failed attempts to resolve the conflict through legal settlements. Residents in Iraqi Kurdistan, where the PKK has been cornered by Ankara since 2016, welcomed peace, but they reiterated the need for Kurdish rights to be guaranteed.
پرۆسەکە ئەگە بەڕاستی بی ئێمەش پێمان خۆشحاڵین بەڵام ئەساسەکەی مەئامەڕە نەبێت لەسەر کورد بە جددی بی نەکەوەی بۆ هەڵخەڵەتانی کورد بۆ مەرامی دەنگهێنانی خۆی بۆ دەنگهێنانی بێتەوە سەر حکم ئەردۆغان دەمانەوێت شتەکە بە جددی بی با زەمانەتشی نێودەوڵەتی وەگری بە سەگدا بنێ بەڵام زەمانەتشی نێودەوڵەتی نەبی نەخێرم لە گۆڵەوەی مەدا بنیم هەرگیز.
Meanwhile, a lavish superjet gifted from Qatar to the U.S. president has raised more than a few eyebrows. Ahead of his visit to Doha, Donald Trump is poised to accept a $400 million luxury Boeing 747, described as a, quote, palace in the sky, from Qatar's royal family. It will reportedly temporarily replace the existing Air Force One plane from the U.S. president typically travels on. Then it will be transferred to Trump's presidential library once he's out of office. The gift is likely the most expensive ever given to a sitting U.S. president. Many voices, including some of Trump's own supporters, say accepting the jet could open him up to corruption investigations.
Today we publish a white paper on immigration, a strategy absolutely central to my plan for change that will finally take back control of our borders and close the book on a squalid chapter for our politics, our economy and our country. Net migration quadrupled until in 2023 it reached nearly 1 million. That's not control, it's chaos. A one-nation experiment in open borders, conducted on a country that voted for control. Well, no more. Today, this Labour government is shutting down the lab. The experiment is over. We risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together. So yes, I believe in this. I believe we need to reduce immigration significantly. Every area of the immigration system, work, family and study, will be tightened up. We will finally honour what take back control meant and begin to choose who comes here.
An assortment of clips there from a speech by Sir Keir Starmer that has been likened to Enoch Powell by members of his own party. In the speech, he announced immigration controls after claiming that the UK risks to become an island of strangers following a squalid chapter with open borders. On Monday, the UK Prime Minister announced a series of policies designed to reduce net immigration to the UK. These include banning new recruitment of care workers abroad, raising English language requirements, and doubling the time it takes to gain citizenship from 5 to up to 10 years. Enoch Powell's 1968 River of Blood speech was widely blamed for a surge in racial attacks after a Conservative politician denounced post-war immigration and claimed that in 15 or 20 years, the black man, this is a quote, will have the whip hand over the white man. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has denied any likeness between the two speeches, emphasising that Starmer acknowledged the value of diversity as well as the contributions of past migrants to Britain. Now stay tuned as we turn to Saudi Arabia, the first stop in US President Donald Trump's visit to the Middle East. Let's find out what he's up to.
All right, we have U.S. President Donald Trump speaking at the U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum. Let's see if we have the clip.
But there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
We are rocking. The United States is the hottest country, with the exception of your country, I have to say, right? I'm not going to take that on. No, Mohammed, I'm not going to take that on. Wouldn't that be a terrible thing if I made that full statement? But I will not do it. You're hotter. At least as long as I'm up here, you're hotter.
That is, of course, Donald Trump, the U.S. president, in a speech that he has still giving at the U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum in Riyadh, where he met his counterpart, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. They agreed on a $142 billion deal, which includes arms and includes tech investments, includes a whole heap of things, which we'll get into in just a second. But this was the first leg of his 3-day trip to the Middle East, and the red carpet has been rolled out as Trump touched down for a highly anticipated trip. And in typical Trump fashion, the stakes are incredibly high, and yet no one can predict exactly what he will say or do. The US president arrived in Riyadh this morning, where he met with Mohammed bin Salman before signing that strategic economic partnership deal. Tomorrow, he'll be in Qatar and the UAE on Thursday. In just 3 days, he's expected to tackle everything from a ceasefire in Gaza, lifting sanctions on Syria, Iran nuclear talks, as well as investment in weapons, energy, and AI. But even before he left DC, there was already controversy around a $400 million luxury plane he was gifted by the Qatari royal family, something the other two Gulf nations will no doubt have to one up. When asked about whether he was abusing his position of power for personal gain, here's what he had to say.
So I think it's a great gesture from Qatar. I appreciate it very much. I would never be one to turn down that kind of an offer. I mean, I could be a stupid person and say, no, we don't want a free, very expensive airplane. But I thought it was a great gesture. And I think it was a gesture because of the fact that we have helped and continue to, we will continue to, all of those countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and others, we keep them safe. If it wasn't for us, they probably wouldn't exist right now.
And there's a lot riding on this visit. Trump's first term in office radically reshaped the power dynamics in the Middle East. It cemented Saudi Arabia and the UAE's rise to power as the new de facto leaders of a region upended by mass uprisings, military coups, and invasions that wiped out a generation of strongmen: Mubarak, Hussein, Gaddafi, Saleh, and eventually Bashar al-Assad. Under Trump, Israel normalized relations with a number of Arab countries, including the UAE, Sudan, Morocco, and Bahrain. Qatar was isolated in an economic blockade by its neighbors, and the US killed both ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi as well as Iran's most senior figure, Qasem Soleimani, senior military figure rather. The Palestinians were shunned in D.C. while Trump moved the Israeli embassy to Jerusalem, and although his so-called deal of the century was laughed off, it still paved the way for Israel's ongoing attempts to annex the West Bank and propelled far-right settlers into powerful political positions. But this is not the same region that Trump left 4 years ago. Its reliance on the U.S. has begun to waver as China expands its influence. Its young leaders are more confident and want to do things their way. And with an ongoing genocide in Gaza and a devastating war in Lebanon, and many leaders, particularly Saudi Arabia, have backtracked on normalization. Even his own relationship with Netanyahu appears to be on the rocks. So what should we expect from Trump's week in the Gulf? Well, to break it all down for us, we're joined by our DC political reporter, Sean Matthews. Sean, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Mo.
I don't know if you've been listening to the speech. We were listening to it just before we had to jump into the studio. What is your takeaway from what he said from the first day of this 3-day visit?
Yeah, I was listening to the speech. I think, two notable things stand out for me. The first one is the Abraham Accords. We reported that the Saudis were lobbying very, very intensely to pre-negotiate this visit. They didn't want Trump to bring up the Abraham Accords. It would put the Crown Prince in a very, very sticky situation given the Saudi public's backlash against Israel over the war in Gaza. And Trump actually brought up the Abraham Accords. It looks like there was silence in the crowd when he mentioned that. And then he kind of backed off a little bit and he said, I want you to do it, but you'll do it on your own time. And you know what? I'm fine with that, kind of in typical Trump fashion. So I think that's what we heard from the Abraham Accords. And I think for the Saudis, this will be seen as a victory that they didn't get intensely lobbied in public to do the Abraham Accords. Trump also, I'm watching the speech right before, he also jumped to Iran. And, the big file hanging over this visit, Mo, there's so many open files. There's Gaza, there's Syria, there's Lebanon, there's these economic deals, but it's really the Iranian nuclear deal. That is the file that dominates this administration. It dominates the American media, and it's probably the most controversial topic right now in the Trump White House. Trump said that Iran was a destructive force in the region. He had a lot of bravado in there. And then again, in kind of typical Trump wheeling and dealing fashion, he walked it back and he said, I'd like to give the Iranians a deal. I want them to do very well, something along those lines. So I think he kind of laid out those two top geopolitical issues. But then, of course, we can't separate where Trump's speech was occurring. It was against the backdrop of this U.S.-Saudi investment forum. And that is what Trump really wanted to promote, this idea about bilateral economic relations and the investment deals that you had mentioned earlier.
And you can kind of see a glow in the room. Everyone was laughing, everyone was joyful, and no doubt that is off the back of this $142 billion partnership deal that was signed between him and Mohammed bin Salman this morning. What does that deal look like? What does it stipulate? And basically, how far does that go towards what Trump was saying before about wanting $1 trillion worth of investment from Saudi?
Yeah, well, so I think he wants $1 trillion. I think he's giving himself some leeway. He wants $1 trillion between the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qataris. Of course, we noted yesterday that $1 trillion is about the GDP of Saudi Arabia in 2024. So, I don't think Saudi is going to put their entire GDP into the U.S. But even the White House statement announcing this deal that came out a few hours ago, just less than an hour ago, maybe. It has kind of the typical Trump bravado in it and the exaggeration. And there is some heft to it. But the White House statement says $600 billion in deals. I was trying to total, actually, before I came on the show, the amount of dollar values that were listed, and it seems a lot less than $600 billion, even by the White House's own admission. I think one thing that is clear is that this $142 billion you mentioned is on the defense side, and these are the arms sales. We mentioned that this was the low-hanging fruit for Trump in order to seal the deal. The Gulf states have always wanted a steadier supply of U.S. weapons systems. The Biden administration was, not resistant to that, but they had slow-walked some of that. We know there were tensions between Biden and MBS in his early days. And the easiest way for Trump to kind of bag a few deals was to just, cut the cords loose on arms sales and really open that up. In April, he unveiled a new foreign military sales system. And his talking point, we were told from U.S. officials and Arab officials even, was that Trump was really going to discuss kind of this new U.S. approach to arms sales, where it'd be faster, quicker, they would expedite them more. And it looks like the Saudis and the U.S. have also discussed F-35 warplane sales. That's a huge development if that's true. F-35s were always tied to Saudi normalizing with Israel. So, if the Saudis can get a bilateral deal with the U.S. for F-35s, or even begin the discussion about that, it would be irking the Israelis, and it would be seen as a win for the Saudis. One thing that's not in this deal, the $600 billion portfolio that we saw, is nuclear energy. At least I haven't seen it. And of course, that was the main topic. Trump's energy chief was in Saudi in April, and he said that the U.S. and Saudi Arabia were making steps towards a bilateral nuclear deal, potentially, where the U.S. would sell civilian nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia. That is a very politically fraught topic in Washington. It's the key goal of the Saudis. So I don't see that actually in the statement. Maybe something will come out later on that, or I'm missing it. But I think that was a high one that people were watching for. And of course, there's the mention of artificial intelligence, semiconductor chips, all of these things that the Saudis really do want, that the U.S. has, leaders in the semiconductor industry. And I imagine that those deals will come to fruition. I mean, the Gulf states, especially Saudi and the UAE, want to lead in artificial intelligence. They need semiconductors. The CEOs of NVIDIA, of OpenAI, they're all in Saudi right now for this investment conference. So I think we will see some deals being made here for sure. I don't know if it's the $600 billion that Trump was trumpeting.
Yeah, and we saw him shouting out some of those tech leaders that are in the crowd. And Sam Altman was there. Elon Musk, of course, is there. So I'm sure that there's still going to be a lot happening behind the scenes, even as Trump leaves. But while he's there, and let's talk about some of those other massive issues that are in the room. Syria, of course, is a big topic of conversation, both in Saudi and in Qatar. We know that the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara, is set to meet Trump possibly tomorrow, possibly in Riyadh. What is he trying to get from him? What has Trump promised, if anything?
Yeah, Mo, this is a huge development, and it broke right today that Trump announced he confirmed that he would meet Shara. Basically, what Ahmed al-Shara needs is sanctions relief desperately. I think the Gulf states are willing to invest in Syria's reconstruction. Saudi Arabia and Qatar especially. We saw that Qatar came out and they said that they would pay the salaries of Syrian government officials. Saudi and the U.S. also paid back Syria's international debts, a couple $100 million. So the Gulf states have been signaling for the last couple of weeks that they're prepared to step up in Syria. I think from the Gulf side, part of that is that they want to curb some of Turkey's influence in Syria, especially for Saudi Arabia, I think. Saudi Arabia has the money to put into Syria. Turkey doesn't have the money. So I think Saudi Arabia sees a way to maybe clip Turkey's rising wings a little bit in Syria, but also prevent Syria from becoming a failed state. The Saudis simply don't want that. Of course, the lobbying from Israel on Syria has been intense, Mo. We've reported this for months now. that the Israelis were lobbying the U.S. to keep troops in northeast Syria.
And this is speaking about Iran and their relationship to obviously Trump has really put a lot of political power onto this Iran nuclear talks. Saudi Arabia has hosted the first one. They've been quite involved. We're going to talk about Israel in a second because they are also a key part of this this process that's been happening this week, or their absence has been a kind of a key topic of conversation. But let's talk about where those Iran talks are at, what Trump hopes to get done, if anything. Is this even on the agenda while he's here?
Yeah, I think for sure it's on the agenda. I mean, the Gulf states are going to be lobbying Trump very, very hard to seal a nuclear deal with Iran. I mean, the Saudis want a deal, the Qataris want a deal, even the Emiratis want a deal. I mean, all of these countries have had a rapprochement with Iran. There's a fragile détente, but it is a real détente, and they do not want to see an escalation with Iran. So I think Trump's going to be pushed very hard to get a nuclear deal done. Trump mentioned Iran earlier. We said in his speech. And I think one of the main factors that is driving this concern is that Trump has a base, the U.S. base, his Trump America First base, is very eager for a nuclear deal. The level of lobbying that we've seen in the pro-Trump media in the U.S. from figures like Tucker Carlson, from figures like Joe Rogan, has been really, really intense. Steve Bannon, that the U.S. cannot get into another Middle Eastern war. So I think Trump is definitely going to move towards he's definitely going to move towards trying to strike a deal with Iran. The U.S. and the Iranians had discussions over the weekend. I think that's ongoing. I think the irony is that if Trump does strike a deal with Iran, the deal that he's likely to strike is the 2015 Obama deal, but a lot weaker from the U.S. side because obviously Iran's nuclear program has advanced so much. But that really is the platform. I mean, people kind of ask what would a deal with the U.S. And Iran look like? And I just say, it would look like the 2015 nuclear deal because that's really the only deal that the U.S. can strike with Iran. Again, there's a big debate right now going on over Iran, whether Iran would be able to enrich uranium or not. And we've gotten mixed signals from Trump administration officials who say they would support a civilian Iranian nuclear program, but Iran wouldn't be allowed to enrich uranium. It would have to import it. I think that's the crux of the debate, honestly. The Obama era deal allowed Iran to enrich at a very, very low level. Who knows? But I think the Gulf states would probably be open to that level of enrichment, a very, very small amount. And I think Trump is weighing it, as he himself has said, right? He has not decided. But there is clear momentum for a deal, I think.
Now, there's so many things that I want to talk to you about, and there's so much that's on the table this week. But let's quickly, before we wrap up, touch on Netanyahu and Trump, because speaking about Iran, that has been kind of a sore spot for the two of them. Netanyahu does not want Trump to be making a deal, and we saw how much that relationship has broken with this hostage release that was negotiated between Hamas and the U.S. without Israel involvement at all. What is happening between Israel and Trump right now?
Yeah, well, there's a clear rift between Trump and Netanyahu, and I would even probably say the Israeli establishment to a certain degree. The deal with the free Idan Alexander, it's a huge embarrassment for Netanyahu. There's no way about getting around that. I mean, Hamas basically is showcasing to the Trump administration that it is not the obstacle to a ceasefire in Gaza, that it's willing to wheel and deal, that it's very practical, that it's willing to go out there and cut a deal and erase Idan Alexander without, as far as I'm aware, any concessions that were granted from the U.S. I think a very savvy move by Hamas actually to release him, and it's going to cause a big stir in Israel. It already is with the hostages' families. The problem for Netanyahu, of course, is that he is in a position where he cannot strike a deal because his government would likely collapse. But yeah, there is clear daylight between Trump and the Israelis. I think one thing that's been interesting, we've reported on this just briefly because I think it's very important for our viewers to understand this. Trump on Tuesday of last week, he announced his ceasefire agreement with the Houthis, and that's really when we saw this kind of crescendo of tensions with the Israelis escalating because Trump really left the Israelis out to dry. One U.S. defense official I spoke with compared the Trump-Houthi ceasefire to Israel's Aramco moment, referencing Trump's decision in 2019 not to respond to an attack on Saudi Arabia's oil installations. And that precipitated a huge monumental change in Saudi Arabia's foreign policy, I think, over the last 6 or 7 years. So it's a huge embarrassment for Israel. Trump has basically, cut a bilateral deal that leaves Israel out in the cold with the Houthis. And then as the week progressed, we saw more tensions kind of emerging. And then, of course, Trump's not in Israel. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth canceled his visit to the country. That was kind of walked back, saying it wasn't a cancellation, but it was a cancellation. So there are clear tensions. But I think just going forward, this was what I would leave us with. Trump, in his first 100 or so days, he compartmentalized the files with Israel. So he basically has given Israel a free hand to do what it wants in Gaza, to wage war, to lay siege to Gaza. Israel has been able to do that, but on other files, Trump has pushed back on the Israelis. So on Syria, he's pushed back on the Israelis. He did not abide to their request that the U.S. leave more troops in Syria. He said that he's willing to mediate with Erdogan over a deconfliction line with the Israelis personally. That stung Netanyahu. He cut a truce with the Houthis, and of course, we talked about Iran. The big question going forward is going to be whether Trump now turns to the Gaza file and puts pressure on Netanyahu for a ceasefire. I suspect in the Gulf states, he's going to come under serious pressure to do so. They want a ceasefire. They want this war wrapped up. But that's really where we're at now, is that will this compartmentalization last, or will Trump and Netanyahu come to a clash on Gaza?
Now, I know that we talked about not making any big predictions, so I'll not ask you to make anything bold, but I'm sure that we're going to have a lot more to talk about by the end of this Trump visit to the Middle East. Sean Matthews, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mo.
And you can keep up to date with all things Trump this week by following Sean's excellent reporting on our website, middleeasteye.net. And next up, we head to court here in the UK, where the government is defending its arms sales to Israel.
Welcome to MEELive Spotlight. Today, the UK government defends itself in court over the supply of fighter jet parts to Israel amid investigations of genocide in Gaza. Campaigners from Palestinian rights group Al-Haq and the Global Legal Action Network, or GLAN, are attempting to force the government to stop supplying F-35 components to Israel. Although this is officially day one of a 4-day trial, it marks the culmination of a legal battle that began 19 months ago and has only reached the High Court after a successful appeal against the government's attempt to dismiss it. Since the first challenge in October 2023, the case has become focused on F-35 jets since the Labour government suspended 30 arms licenses to Israel in September last year, but it carved out an exemption for the aircraft's component parts. The government argued that this exemption was necessary to protect the UK's worldwide F-35 programme, but their challengers describe it as a deliberate loophole to continue supplying weapons to Israel. Joining us now to lay out the evidence is the director of the Global Legal Action Network, Garud O'Quinn. Welcome to Middle East Eye Live. This whole trial centres... Good afternoon. This whole trial centres around the potential supply of parts for F-35 jets. Tell us why. How deadly are these jets, and what role are they playing in the war on Gaza?
Sure. The F-35 warjet is the weapon of choice for the Israeli military in their offensive on Gaza. It is a platform capable of delivering multi-ton munitions, and Lockheed Martin, its manufacturer, boasts about it being the most lethal warjet on the planet. We have seen as well clear evidence that the F-35 warjet has been extensively used. Over 8,000 missions have been flown over Gaza, racking up in excess of 15,000 hours, requiring a good deal of maintenance and support and parts, which are supplied by the British. 15% of the F-35 is British made. So it's a critical, these are critical components for the jet's functioning. They include, laser targeting, fuselage, ejector seats, really key components without which the F-35 would not be able to fly.
And how much evidence is there that this direct supply chain exists? It's notoriously difficult to trace these trades very often, and particularly with the case of F-35 parts, the government has said, they've said it's pretty much untraceable. So yeah, how much evidence is there that this is a problem, and at what scale?
Well, it's clear that British weapons are making their way indirectly to Israel. So back in September, an hour before coming into court as part of our proceedings and under threat of injunction, the UK government suspended 30 arms export licenses. These were for weaponry, munitions, and tank parts that were deemed to be directly deployed in the context of Gaza. But they made a deliberate loophole for the F-35 fighter jet. So they suspended direct exports, but made a loophole for the indirect exports, which make their way via a global pool of spare parts, from which manufacturers in the United States draw from to build the F-35 and sell this and provide this to Israel. And recently there have been another shipment of jets. So it's very open and clear that from that process and the government's own account, that British parts are going there. The question becomes, can they turn a blind eye? Is this sort of loophole that they have put forward, is it lawful? And the government argued that it was not possible to trace when a part would end up going to Israel, as if a complex military is unable to account for where its components go. This is absolutely possible, and that's what we're arguing in court. And on that basis, it is possible for them to identify and stop parts ending up in Israel, but maintaining the F-35 program in other settings where the rule of law is respected.
You just alluded to this decision by Labour in September last year to suspend 30 out of 350 arms licenses to Israel. You said that this happened just hours before you were, set to file a legal challenge against them. Is the implication there that the government suspended these arms licenses in order to avoid that lawsuit? Was that a direct relation?
Yes, the government had made its assessment, and it was revealed in September of last year that by its own assessment, it did not believe that Israel was capable or committed to complying with international humanitarian law. And there was a serious risk, a real risk that British weaponry, if provided, would be used in serious violations of international humanitarian law. So this became the basis on which they decided to suspend. But we know that they sat on that for a number of months before acting. So it does feel like that the government is delaying, only doing what is absolutely necessary, and is stretching legal arguments and language to breaking point, where they provide really, really absurd bases for making these exceptions.
Mm-hmm. Given that the government did suspend these arms sales, though, in response to your initial challenge, and I suppose also reflecting on the response that you've had from the government to the issues that you have raised throughout this 19-month process, do you think there are any real concerns within the government about the supply of arms to Israel, or do you think that this is just about watching their back?
Well, I think the British government has been explicit in making the exception for the F-35 warjet. They conducted a weighing exercise, and they considered the UK-US relationship. That was very much to the front of their mind, and that less F-35 warjets in the hands of the likes of Israel would lead to it would undermine international peace and security. So it's clear that they're putting these interests and the contracts with weapons manufacturers and their profits over and above the human life in Gaza and the international legal protections that have been in place since the Second World War. They're actively undermining these really important protections, the international law itself, and pandering to the whims of the Trump administration. So, our case has helped. The court, the UK government was forced to reveal its assessment about Israel. It wasn't something it was eager to share, and in having that exposed in open court, also betrayed the actual considerations that caused them to create this deliberate loophole. That seems to be it. And the government's position has sort of changed over time over the course of this case. Certain arguments have fallen away, and I believe now they really are cornered. So it's going to be a very interesting few days in court ahead of us.
Garudo Quinn, thank you for your time. Now, viewers, you can keep up to date.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can keep up to date with the case at MiddleEastEye.net. Middle East Eye's senior investigations editor, Danya Akkad, has not only traced the case since its origins, she's been at the court today to hear the government's defence. Here is her update from the High Court.
The atmosphere in front of the courthouse today was pretty animated. There were probably maybe about a little under 100 supporters, pro-Palestinian supporters, who gathered in front of the courthouse before the hearing happened. One of the lawyers for the claimants told me that just kind of seeing this atmosphere, having waited 19 months to see, when this judicial hearing would actually start, was quite moving. Basically, El Haq and Glan hold that the government has violated its own obligations under domestic and international laws, and the government holds that it hasn't. And the focus now has been on UK-made F-35 parts that are being sent to a global pool, which then feeds spare parts to different partners in the F-35 program, including Israel. The government has argued that it couldn't stop sending F-35 parts to this global pool because those parts aren't tracked and traced. Therefore, for the government to make sure that its parts didn't go to Israeli fighter jets from that global pool, they would have had to stop sending parts altogether to the global pool. And this would have been hugely problematic to the F-35 program and would have real issues for peace and security internationally, according to the government. El Haq and Glan are saying, well, no, you should be able to stop those parts, and you have a duty to stop sending those parts because of the conventions and treaties that you sign on to, like the convention, the Genocide Convention and the Arms Trade Treaty, and also by the government's own standards, its criteria for deciding when and if it okays arms exports. So I would say one of the real takeaways I've gotten from today is learning about kind of the decision-making process once Labor came into power in July. Foreign Secretary David Lammy has said that on his first day in office, he asked for new advice to be gathered to inform his decision-making going forward on what to do about arms exports to Israel. And it seems that by July 24th, so about 19 days into office, he had some analysis before him to make a decision. The Labor government then partially suspended around 30 licenses on the 2nd of September. I would love to know what happened between July 24th and the 2nd of September. Why did it take 5 weeks to make that decision? What was going on?
That was Danya Akkad, Senior Investigations Editor here at Middle East Eye. Now, as Danya reported, protesters have gathered outside the court to add their voices to this legal battle, which is also backed by Oxfam, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty. Our reporter Tamara Himani spoke to those in the crowd. Among them were MPs, including from the government's own party. Here's what they had to say.
I don't think that the British government is just complicit. I think they are actively facilitating genocide through arms sales, through diplomatic cover, through surveillance. 42 MPs, myself included, have written to David Lammy to explain why arms sales, according to Israel's tax authority and import data, show that arms sales have continued, including F-35s, and the allegation that he has misled Parliament alongside other ministers.
Over the last 19 months of this unfolding genocide, every single F-35 plane that has dropped 200-pound bombs on Gaza, known to kill in a way that is indiscriminate, has had British parts inside it, has British complicity, has British partnership inside it. We literally have millions of people whose lives hang in the balance right now. So everything anyone can do to expand the base of their solidarity is needed now.
David Lammy has been answering questions or failing to answer questions from us for almost a year now on these issues. He started off by saying that they couldn't control what happened to the parts for the F-35 jets, refuses to answer questions about the use of the Royal Air Force Base at Akrotiri in Cyprus, and then claimed that weapons were not being sent when they were being sent. And he also at various times has either said there is or isn't a genocide. He doesn't seem able to make up his mind on that one. It is a shambles, the way the government is presenting its case. But beneath all that is the most appalling deception that somehow or other they're not complicit in the acts of genocide when they clearly are.
And that's all the time that we have for you this week. But please stay tuned because we're going to be covering these two ongoing stories, both the UK's case in court throughout the course of the week, as well, of course, as Trump visiting the Middle East. And before you go, we want to hear from you.
Do send in your thoughts, your questions, your responses to any of the stories that we cover here at Middle East Eye. You can comment on the video or you can contact us on social media at Middle East Eye across all social media platforms or by emailing meelive@middleeasteye.net.
And remember to please hit that notification button so you know exactly when we go live. It's every Tuesday, every Thursday, 5 p.m. British Standard Time or 12 if you're in New York.
See you then.